Okay.
It's all right, we've got loads of time.
Yeah, that was nerve-wracking though. I think it's working. Okay.
Yes.
Yes, we are live. Hello everyone, and welcome to Back from the Brink's third live event talk. I'm Jack. Back from the Brink is a England-wide conservation organisation partnership programme saving England's most endangered species from extinction. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to shine a light on young conservationists in the sector who are doing amazing things. So without further ado, here is Sophie Pavell with her talk on communications and beavers.
Hello, thank you very much. Thanks, Jack. And without further ado, I'd like to wish everybody a very happy International Beaver Day. So it's a very happy day here in Beaver World. So happy Beaver Day to you. Now, I'm just going to share my screen and see if that works. Hopefully you can all see that. We've got a lovely beaver there. That's taken by my friend Elliot in Scotland. And I feel like it captures the very essence of beaver, as I like to say. So yes, happy Beaver Day. Now, a little bit about me, I guess, to start off with. So my whole job really is to explore how can we better communicate nature and conservation and science. And in particular, I'm really interested in social media, especially, and how can we utilize digital platforms to really maximize our message spreading when we're wanting to talk about really important, complicated things like climate change and biodiversity loss and things like that. So I'm really interested in what really hooks people into content online. What do people really bite at? What do people disengage with? Things like that. And it's really hard. It's a really hard balance to find, and it's very much a trial and error process. So over the last couple of years since I left university, I've been very much experimenting with different kinds of content, what works well, what doesn't work so well. And the audience I really try and tap into is the ever hard to reach millennial audience, so age group between like 18 to 34-year-olds. A really tricky audience. I'm in that audience. I'm 25, and we're very demanding. We have very short attention spans. We live in a world that's very fast paced. It holds everything to account, and so at the mercy at the same time of grappling with climate change and biodiversity loss. So there's a lot to take in. There are very demanding audiences out there who want things instantly. So we need to figure out best ways that we can tap into what they want. And that's where science communication can really help. And I did not plan on being in this industry at all. When I did 4 A levels at school, including English and psychology. And at the time, I had no idea what I was good at. I knew what I was interested in, which was just the outdoors, adventures, and nature and wildlife. But I had no idea what to do with that interest. And I was always really envious of people who seemed to just have a really clear idea of what they wanted to do. And, they just go out and get it, become a doctor, become an engineer, become a dentist, whatever it was. I wish I had that kind of purpose. So anyway, my parents encouraged me to just do what I was interested in, which I think is a really valuable thing to promote. And so I went on to do zoology at Bristol University and loved it. It was a really, perfect degree really for me, really good foundation and a very broad range of fascinating subjects. But throughout those 3 years, I was still in very much a state of indecision, and I think it's really common as well. I think there's too much pressure in society for everyone to have a plan and kind of be like, what are you doing next? But what are you doing next? And it's quite stressful. So I went through various iterations of wanting to go into law, and then physiotherapy, and then veterinary medicine, the military, various things like that. And then by chance, I had to do a field course in my second year that was entitled, I think it was Public Engagement in Science. And I just thought it was a massive laugh, really, just spending a week in Bristol with my mates in the summer, just trying to tell people more about the natural world. And I didn't realize how fun it really was. And also that perhaps it was the start of me recognizing something that I might be good at. And I was really enjoying it. I realized I liked talking, but it was amazing. It was very satisfying to talk about subjects that you're really passionate about to an audience that perhaps might become a little bit more curious about them. And then I happened to, I had actually accepted a master's at the vet school in Bristol to do a master's in global wildlife health and conservation. And then by chance, again, late laptop night, as what sometimes happens, is I came across a master's in science communication at the University of the West of England. And long story short, I did that. And it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. It was a very practical course. It allowed us to explore creativity. We got trained in things like radio, podcasts, how to assimilate complex bits of science from a research paper, for example, and then write a popular article about it. So it was a really fascinating introduction into this, what was at the time still a relatively new industry. Science communication was a bit of a buzzword still. And fast forward a year or so after that, I delved into the world of freelance science communication, made some really good links with charities like the Wildlife Trust and the RSPB, started doing occasional articles for publications like BBC Countryfile and BBC Wildlife. But I was still feeling very much a novice and very sort of classic imposter syndrome. Science communication was becoming more and more of a thing. You know, really good example of science communication, of course, is David Attenborough's documentaries. And at the time when I was doing my master's, Blue Planet 2 had just come out, and there was that huge surge of social media activity around plastic pollution. And that kind of got me thinking, like, oh, maybe social media is quite a good way to start talking about science like this. And so I started applying for lots of jobs in communications and different charities. I really had such a thirst and a hunger for working in a team and for learning, you know, to learn from people who knew more than me and to just be part of something that was doing active conservation. I got bored and kind of slightly frustrated working on my own, and got rejected from loads of jobs, tons of failure. It's quite hard, quite demoralizing, because I felt I was qualified. And then this time last year, right when the pandemic first kicked off, I got contacted by Beaver Trust, who were a very new charity at the time. And James Wallace, who's now the chief exec, asked if I fancied joining their very small team in helping them talk more about beavers. And what a year it's been. I'm now comms coordinator, and I work directly with the communications director, Eva Bishop. And let's go back. And it's just been a whirlwind, you know, as you probably know. Beavers have had the most incredible year in terms of lots of people talking about them. They're a very hot topic in conservation at the moment. And so it's been a joy and a ride to be involved in getting more information about beavers out there to the world. And on the back of that, or sort of on the side, for a few months leading up to that, I had written an article in the Metro about the State of Nature report, which is a big report that happens every 3 years that kind of talks about what's going on in the natural world and you know, reporting the latest data and what we should do about it and whether or not we should be really worried. And I wrote an article about it, and it got picked up by a publisher, and they asked if I'd ever fancied writing a book, and I said absolutely not, that's ridiculous and terrifying. Long story short, I ended up writing a proposal for a book, and on the same day that I got offered the job at Beaver Trust, I got the commission with Bloomsbury to write a book about British wildlife and climate change. So moral of the story is, I think if you're passionate about it, and I think it needs a bit of self-belief, there's a lot to be said for pursuing stuff that you're interested in, and also for feeling valued at work. That can really help your mental state as well, and help you kind of figure out what it is you want to do. So that's a bit of background. Now, science communication is one of those terms that is just bashed about a lot, increasingly so. And when I first came across it, I had no idea what it was. You can kind of figure it out, I suppose. But if you type science communication into Google, it comes out with this. It comes out with the practice of informing, educating, raising awareness of science-related topics, and increasing the sense of wonder about scientific discoveries and arguments. And essentially, that's a pretty good definition. I can relate to a lot of that. But what about if we break it down? So when I was first writing my dissertation in my master's, I came across this really fascinating paper by this guy called Burns, and it was published in 2003. And he basically took science communication and broke it down into a set of 5 sort of categories, a criteria list, if you like, of these are kind of the checklists for if you do a science communication endeavor, whether it's an event or a talk or a podcast or an article. He sort of started to say, if you meet all this criteria, you then will have achieved what's called upstream public engagement. And in science communication, upstream public engagement is kind of like the ultimate goal. It's like the holy grail. It's what you really want to get out of an event. Upstream is very active engagement. It's where people might feel so impacted by something that they have an attitudinal change, or they change a certain habit. They might use a reusable coffee cup, for example. And so this is called the AEIOU method. It's one of my favorites. I try and implement it every time I do a piece of science communication. And so it stands for awareness, enjoyment, interest, opinion forming, and understanding. So if you write an article or if you do a podcast and it's on a scientific topic, let's say it's about climate change or beavers of climate change, great marriage. Is the podcast going to promote an awareness of the subject? Are people going to know a little bit more about them? Are they going to know what you're talking about? This is a really key one. Are they going to enjoy it? Are they going to listen to this podcast or read this article and really enjoy what they're reading or listening to? Is it going to make them interested? Is it going to stimulate them enough that they might seek out more examples of information about those topics? And this is probably one of my favorites. Is it going to allow them to form an opinion? Because if someone is so sort of hooked in by a subject, they're likely to form an opinion about it. And I think that's a really key sort of success measure of whether a piece of science communication has been a good one. And then finally, does it promote understanding? So do they come away having had a nice read or a nice listen, they have an opinion about it and ultimately understand it? And then Burns incorporated all of this into this really nice definition of science communication, which goes, science communication is the use of appropriate skills, media, activities, and dialogue to produce one or more of the following personal responses to science: awareness, enjoyment, interest, opinion forming, and understanding. And I think the word personal is really key here. I think whenever you try and do a bit of psychom, I always try and imagine an actual person of who do I want to be engaging with this. And me, for many years, it's been a couple of my cousins who are both girls and both teenagers, and I think famously slightly disengaged with the natural world. They perhaps think they think I'm a bit uncool at times, but I often have them in my head. And so I think having an actual physical person attached to your goals for whatever you're doing in science communication is really key. So this all got me quite interested in my master's into how can we use the platforms that are growing. So at the time, social media was becoming really big. Instagram, Twitter and stuff were really kicking off. How can we use social media better to communicate science, and are people going to enjoy it? And so that was pretty much my research topic for my dissertation. And I did a long trek around Cornwall for 300 miles, and every day I made a little science video just about the nature and wildlife that I saw, and then I uploaded it each evening in real time to different social media platforms. And then all the data I got were like numbers of views, comments, qualitative and quantitative data to see how people were enjoying it and what people were getting out of it, and whether it was a successful piece of science communication. And then I had to write it up in a report. And when I was doing that, I came across this, it was called the UK Millennials Report. It's a couple of years old now. And I was really struck by this quote that was from a survey they did over like several thousand millennials. So remember the 18 to 34 age group, really key here. And all they said was, I don't care who's saying it, just make it snappy and fun. And that has really stuck with me over the last couple of years in my job with Beaver Trust and in my own freelance stuff. People don't really care who is saying it, or, it's more about the presentation of it. And as I said at the beginning, we're a very demanding audience. We have a really short attention span. We'll click off if it hasn't hooked us in the last, in the first 10 seconds. I guarantee that people will click off this talk now because it hasn't hooked them, probably. It's just the nature of how social media works. And so I think conservation communications can learn so much from what people expect to see on their Twitter feed, on their Instagram feed, on their YouTube. And so this prompted just loads of interest for me. And last year, my dissertation into this very topic was published in a scientific journal in Frontiers, which was a really exciting moment for me. And I think it has a lot of relevance now. I mean, the research is a couple of years old, but what we concluded, me and my wonderful supervisor, Claire Wilkinson, we concluded that basically social media platforms can present this really exciting stepping stone for practitioners to basically be a middleman, or they might be an academic themselves, but basically get a piece of science that is probably really exciting and interesting, but mold it and wiggle it about in a way that will then be really exciting for the public to understand, so they really feel impacted by it and it has that desired effect. Because I don't know about you, if you've been at university or been exposed to academics, sometimes they just have the most incredible research, but they aren't very good at regurgitating it in a way that doesn't sound like they're delivering a lecture, or that doesn't sound like they're trying to talk to another academic. It's so important to engage people on their level and to break it down, and it's hard to do. But we concluded that social media is an absolute no-brainer for conservation organisations and for people wanting to relay important conservation and scientific messages, to get that upstream public engagement, so to get that long-lasting active engagement in a topic. So how does this all relate to beavers? Because that's probably why you're here, because it's Beaver Day and we're going to have lots of lovely photos of cute beavers. This is a beaver kit at the Cornwall Beaver Project, which is hosted by Beaver Trust, and it was taken by Josh, who's our community projects officer, and he's also very handy with a camera, and that's probably one of my favourite photos. Again, essence of beaver, I find. So, bit of context, because it would be silly of me to assume that you all know about beavers. There's a lot of myths to be busted still about beavers. So beavers are essentially hunted for their meat, fur, and castoreum, which is a secretion from a beaver itself and used in perfumes and aspirin and things like that. And although they were once an integral part of our riverscapes and our wetlands, we hunted them to extinction over 400 years ago. And they now sit on the red list of mammals, so they are classed as endangered, and their populations aren't large enough to be self-sustaining. They are the second largest rodent in the world. The Eurasian beaver is the second largest rodent after the capybara in South America, and they are strictly herbivorous. So there's lots of chatter that hasn't been helped by things like Chronicles of Narnia with Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. They do not eat fish. They are strictly vegan. They have a lovely hardwood diet. So they are strictly herbivorous. I don't know how else I can say that. And they've got their lovely crunchy rodent teeth, which help them to fell trees and things. And of course, they build dams. So this was a picture taken again by Elliot, who volunteers for comms for us at Beaver Trust, and is again very handy with a camera up in Scotland. And you can see here they build amazing dams that become basically ecosystems in their own right. And the whole point of a dam is that they submerge the entrances to their lodge. So beavers live in a lodge. They use a lodge to raise their young and to rest and to sleep and things, and to hide from predators, even though they don't have a traditional predator community in the UK anymore, sadly. So the dam basically pools water behind it, and then it submerges the entrances to their lodge. So it's a big kind of predator avoidance strategy. And fun fact, the beaver lodge has been known to, once they kind of had enough of it and they want to move to a different territory and establish a new lodge, the old beaver lodge can be recycled by other animals, and otters have been known to hang out in an ex-beaver lodge as a new halt or something, which is quite cool. Now, this is a lovely photo taken by Nina Constable, and it is a beaver eating something. I can't quite figure out what it is. But as I said, beavers have a full diet of hardwood. So they love apple, willow, yew, aspen, cherry, birch, alder, things like that. And my favorite fact about beavers is that their teeth are bright orange, honestly, like as bright as an actual orange, and they are impregnated with iron to help them, and they carry on growing throughout their life, and the iron helps them deal with a very hard diet. Another fact is that their eyelids, so they have 3 eyelids, and this is called a nictitating membrane, and it's essentially like goggles. So when a beaver goes underwater, the 3rd eyelid comes over, and it basically allows them to see. And I really like that fact as well. And their fur is amazing. This is why we hunted them in the first place, hawks. And under the sort of top layer of fur, you've got a whole layer of very soft fur that has lots of little hooks and little barbs, and that basically traps the water and makes it totally waterproof, which is cool. And then another fact that I love is that beaver lips actually fold behind their teeth, and this allows them to feed under the water without drowning, basically. So that's quite fun. Beavers give birth annually, usually. They care for their young. They're a nice mammalian family structure. And then the young will disperse after the first couple of years. So they'll raise them around the lodge, teach them to feed, fell trees, things like that, teach them to swim, and then they'll disperse and set up their own territories after the first couple of years. Beavers live in established territories throughout the catchment, and I think it's a common thought that beavers will just hit a river and proliferate like rabbits and get out of control. But actually, beavers are quite aggressive towards each other, and so they can very much self-sustain their family groups within a catchment. So they'll sort of reach what's called a carrying capacity, where it's sort of as many beavers that the river can healthily sustain. And then if a beaver family encounters another beaver family, they might be like, oh no, go away. Might even kill each other. But anyway, so I first came across beavers a few years ago now. I live in East Devon, and I live very near the River Otter. And the River Otter has obviously been in the news a lot over the last 12 months to do with beavers. And I first encountered the River Otter Beaver Trial, which was an amazing success by Devon Wildlife Trust, Exeter University in Clinton, Devon Estates. And I was doing a radio project for my master's talking about the trial. And essentially it was a 5-year experiment where the government said to Devon Wildlife Trust, you know, if you can raise enough money to carry out this science-led trial, and you can provide enough hard evidence to support the reintroduction of beavers here, we might review them as a population. And over time, it got huge amounts of public support and was a huge success. And last August, they became the first official English wild population of beavers, which is an amazing feat and sets hopefully a brilliant standard for other populations and trials around the country. Now, this is wonderful Chris Jones, who I'm very lucky to call a colleague and a friend. He is Restoration Director for Beaver Trust, and he also owns and runs and farms at Woodland Valley Farm, and he owns the Cornwall Beaver Project. And this is one of a number of enclosures of beavers that have sprung up around the country over the last few years. You may have seen the Cornwall Beaver Project beavers on Spring Watch. They've had their telly time quite a bit over the last year as well. And a pair of beavers were introduced here in 2017, and they have absolutely transformed. Beavers work so quickly. I think within 48 hours, they'd started collecting materials for dams and things. And they've utterly transformed it into a mosaic of ponds, coppice woodland, regenerated vegetation. There's been an incredible benefit to biodiversity. They've had 7 new bird species, 4 new mammals. Populations of insects like dragonflies and damselflies have just exploded. The dawn chorus is unbelievable there. It's just magical. It feels like Eden. It kind of feels, it's one of those places where it feels familiar, but then also just totally alien all at once, because obviously this is what the whole of, or much of England would have looked like this. And you really feel it too. It's a very sort of visceral experience to be there. And the beaver dams have substantially slowed the flow of floodwater surges and also retained water during periods of drought. So Chris described last year quite provokingly in a way how when we had a drought in the early spring, he was able to siphon water from the beaver pond onto his fields, because he's a farmer as well. and how surrounding farms didn't have that. I guess, you know, it's a bit of a luxury. Water is so important, and Chris has said many times how, as a farmer, drought scares him the most. And so if beavers, by their very nature, can help us against things like flood and drought, then I see them as a no-brainer. Real climate change allies, I think. But of course, beaver reintroduction, as you may have gathered, doesn't go without its problems. Beavers make themselves known very, very quickly. They're known as ecosystem engineers, so very industrious mammals. They're also what's known as a keystone species, so they exert a disproportionate impact on an environment relative to their size and relative to their population numbers, I guess. They fell trees, as you can see here. This is a very hacked away classic beaver tree with the classic hourglass shape there, and then lots of beaver chips here. Fun fact, these chips here make very good bookmarks. I have a couple of bookmarks, and they're quite nice to feel. You can feel the proper grooves from their teeth too, which is quite fun. But because the work, you know, we mustn't forget how much England has changed in the last 400 years since they were here before. More people, more cars, industry, the war, farming, that, you know, there's so much that has changed. And so having this animal back is naturally going to cause a few, or ruffle a few feathers, as it were. Lots of people are concerned that beavers might disrupt the migration of fish, so things like salmon and trout, who they share the river with. But the research is increasingly showing how beavers create actually excellent habitat for fish, including brilliant spawning grounds. And if we look at the research of beavers in other countries in Europe, for example, Bavaria or in Norway, where beavers have been there for much longer than they have here, they've co-evolved for millennia. We mustn't forget as well that beavers and fish have been around and interacting and evolving alongside each other for much longer than we've even been here. So I think there is a lot to be said for acknowledging that, but then again, it's a lot about listening to concerns and offering the right advice. So it's important to say that beavers are not protected in England. Their future is not secure. What we're trying to do, what Beaver Trust is trying to do, is to gather public support and to kind of add a little bit of a sense of urgency in the climate and ecological crisis and promote beavers as not a silver bullet. It's important to say that, because they can be a pain in the arse, and you can ask questions about that later, but as a potential part of the solution. And we actually made a film all about this called Beavers Without Borders last year, which we're really excited is doing quite well in the awards circuit at the moment. That was definitely unexpected. And this film tells the story of beavers so far, and also nods to the hurdles that we've yet to sort of get over. There's a lot of challenges to overcome. And the film itself was a hugely collaborative effort. It was produced and directed by the wonderful Nina Constable, who is a dear friend of mine, and it's just been an absolute joy to work with her on this. So many people contributed to the narrative of this film, as well as to the actual sort of production itself. And in fact, conservation, I think, seems to thrive on this collaboration. And this is one of the things that I was really struck by when I helped out with Back from the Brink. So I was involved in a number of projects with Back from the Brink, for example, the grey long-eared bat, the narrow-headed ant, shrill cardbee. And what I was so, again, struck by was just how powerful people are when they come together and they put heads together and they put agendas aside, put egos aside in many ways. There's a lot of egos flying around which kind of disrupt things annoyingly, mine included many times, I'll say. There's such power in people leaving that behind and just realizing that, you know, biodiversity is dwindling, the climate is changing, and if we want something to happen positively, we're going to have to pull together. And that is something that is really important to Beaver Trust as well. We're a relatively new kid on the block, so to speak. We've only been around for about a year and a half, but we're quite a small and agile team. All of us are environmentalists and conservationists in our own right. And so this has really helped us when we're trying to be creative with our communications and how we talk about beavers and wider stuff. We're not just about beavers, we're about rivers and river buffers and wetlands and everything as well. And yes, so let's return to this slide a sec, because I think this is a really nice way to kind of summarize how we've tried to talk about beavers a little bit. So there's a big awareness campaign with beavers that's been going on at the moment, and it's really important to prioritize that. I think beavers are very lucky in that they're very charismatic animals, and they help promote a lot of enjoyment. So they really help us out in that way. So we've got to owe them a lot. People enjoy looking at beavers, learning about beavers. They're very quirky, interesting mammals. So again, that ticks the interesting box as well. Opinion forming, people have endless opinions about beavers. You can't bring the second biggest rodent in the world back into a very crowded English riverscape without there being some opinions flying around. And it's really important to listen to those. And I think, again, that's something that we try really hard to do. It's important to be very transparent in our communications, and also to listen and show empathy to people who have got concerns, because in many cases they're very valid concerns. So I think there's a lot to be said for listening in science communication as well as advising, and that's something that we really try and do. And then ultimately we want to try and promote an understanding, factually correct, science-led understanding of beavers. So this has helped us in various fun things, such as our new podcast, the Lodgecast, which launched in September. And this has been a really fun way to make the most of this medium. I think podcast listening in 2020 has doubled. So it just seemed like a no-brainer to try and experiment with that as a medium of communication, as well as Instagram and Twitter and the now more traditional platforms that people use. And we talked about all sorts of things. We've got a professional environmental psychiatrist in there talking about eco-anxiety, talk about climate change with amazing legend Simon Reeve. And we also talk about beavers in Britain and the joy of losing your beaver virginity with Jack Badams, who's a Springwatch researcher and all-round bird and nature legend. And I think I put this here because it's a good example of how beavers lend themselves well to fun comms, and again that AEIOU criteria, and how can we hook people in with something fun but ultimately that's informative as well. So beaver virginity was I couldn't resist that one. And it's really helped us, the whole podcast has really helped us focus on our goals of awareness and education around the beaver basics in the last year. That's been an absolute priority for us as a charity. And beavers, yes, they lend themselves well to an innuendo or two. Enlisting celebrity help is also very good. We've been milking this we've been milking this a lot. We're doing a quiz tonight for Beaver Day, cheeky plug, at 7 o'clock. If you just Google Beaver Trust Big Fat Beaver Quiz, all the info will be there. It's just a free registration Eventbrite thing. And I think beyond that, are trying to form a network of people of note. This is nothing revelationary, by the way, it's very well known, but it's really helpful in conservation if you want to try and reach new audiences and break out of that echo chamber and break boundaries down to try and get the attention of people who have massive audiences and massive networks. Is a really, really good tool to be able to do that. We're also trying really hard to break out of the science realm and to mix a little bit with the arts as well. They're infamous it's in a love-hate I think science is in a love-hate relationship with art. And so we've tried, but they work so well together. They complement each other brilliantly. And again, I think that's why science communication is so interesting, because it can really support those other disciplines that perhaps get a little bit poo-pooed in the science sector, like art. So at the moment, Beaver Trust, for example, we've delved into poetry. I personally am quite terrified by poetry, but I think that's a good sign. I think it's a great way for people to share their thoughts about, big, complicated, maybe emotional things as well, like climate and ecological emergency. So that's been something that we've enjoyed experimenting with. And we also teamed up with Aardman Animation, so Wallace and Gromit legend Jim Parkin, and he made us a 60-second beaver, and we put a little video up so that people could do it at home, and that was released during first lockdown. And that's again just a nice example of how can we still educate people about beavers, but do it in a way where people are hopefully having enough fun that they kind of forget that they're learning. And all of this, I think, is just really important for upstream engagement and active communication that really resonates with an audience. And perhaps, the ultimate goal is for it to be memorable. and for people maybe to feel like they had so much fun that they might tell their friends about it, and then that's how you sort of evangelize conservation in that way. And there we go. Well, I mean, look, you can't resist, can you? They've got such good cute factor PR, and we thank them very much for that. And so I think my main top tips to finish are: don't overthink it. I think conservation can be scary and intimidating, as can social media. And I think the worst thing you can do is just to get in a spiral of trying too hard almost. I think simple, stripped back, obviously fact-led is the best. Also, don't underestimate the power of words and creativity. As I said, art and science go hand in hand, and we mustn't underestimate the power of that. Less is more, always. Concise, snappy. Remember the quote: snappy and fun. It's what people want. Do your research. Credibility is key, obviously, in science communication. That's part of the challenge of it, is how can you make it fun, but make sure it's factually correct. I've definitely fallen down various loopholes in the past in that department. And value collaboration. Join forces with people who share the same values. Join forces with people who don't share the same values. One of the most, some of the best things to watch when people are disagreeing about stuff. And we've hosted a couple of webinars about beavers where, there's been some mild arguments and disagreements, but that's how stuff gets done. That's how solutions are found. It's pointless if we're all just agreeing with each other and patting each other on the back. We have to, break that chamber. And finally, be yourself. I think social media can be brilliant and it can be toxic. And I think one of the toxic things about it is when you start to feel like you're, not suited to it, or you feel like you can't be yourself on it. Social media lends itself very well to people's personality. And I think just relax a little bit, have fun with it, enjoy it. And yeah, that's me done. Thank you very much.
That was so good. Like, so informative.
Thanks. Shall I stop sharing?
Yeah, stop sharing. Yeah, that'd be good.
Cool.
Okay. I really hope there's some young, conservationists, like kind of teenagers, younger, watching this and thinking, what can I do in the future? How can I get into it? Because you have some really good stuff at the start of your talk kind of covering that. And actually, our first question is linked to that. So this one's from Chloe. Hi, Sophie. Would you say that your master's was important / necessary in the development of your career?
Good question. I have to say yes. I think when I left my undergrad in zoology, I did not feel ready for the working world. And I felt like I just had this very broad, basic, vague understanding of the natural world and ecology and things, and I had no idea how to apply it. And so I think, if anything, the masters gave me confidence and allowed me to figure out what I was good at, which was kind of the ultimate burning question that had been preying on me since school, where I was just like, I don't know what I'm good at. And it's a blessing and a curse in a way. So I think it has been instrumental in helping me to get where I am, but I think that was perhaps more of a confidence thing than anything else. I don't, with my job with Beaver Trust, I think having a master's in science communication was a bonus, but it definitely wasn't a deal breaker at all.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I came from computing science, so programming.
Really?
Yeah, so I was a programmer of iPhone apps, and then so I quit that and then did a load of volunteering, and then kind of got a bit lucky and got a job at the RSPB, and then kind of went from there. So I had like a sort of career change. So I would say I like your point about the being about confidence. I think the thing that gave me a lot of confidence was getting that first job.
Oh yeah, it's so important because it just makes you feel validated, and kind of when you've spent so much money and time and hard work on university, to have it's such a boost to get a job that is related to your degree. It's so satisfying, and I think it's really important for motivation, helping you feel like you've got a purpose. And confidence is a huge thing. Everyone struggles with it,
for sure. There's some really chunky questions on here that I'm sure you
They're
can.
about beaver conflict management.
Yeah, well, there is literally one like that. Are you ready? You ready to dive into it?
Yeah.
It's from Paul. What would you say are the main institutional, political, business, etc., barriers to environmental progress, such as landscape restoration and conservation? Paul's dropped it there. Who's dropped the bomb?
Oh, you have dropped the bomb. Gosh. The main political barriers, I think it's really difficult. I think with beavers, it's the fact that there's just not enough. The evidence is accumulating all the time as to why beavers are good for the environment, but it's never enough yet. And it's a question of time. So there's always lots of setbacks. You make a little bit of progress, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, always. And it just takes a couple of negative experiences with beavers for the people in charge to be like, oh, hang on, let's pump the brakes, because we just need to investigate why this happened and why there was a conflict here. So it's just a factor of time. It's very infamously slow progress, as we've seen, for example, in Scotland with grouse moor management and mountain hares and illegal raptor persecution. You can have a huge weight of public opinion and support behind something, but at the end of the day, you're not the ones making the decision. And there's a lot of factors within that political decision that are more complicated than we probably appreciate. And so I think it's time, and I think it's evidence, and I think that's why we're trying really hard as a charity to be science and evidence led, to help speed up those decisions and sort of make it a no-brainer, an easy decision. As a conservationist, of course, beavers are an absolute win, but there are lots of barriers. It's very almost naive of me to say that without putting it in the context of the challenges. So I hope that vaguely answers your question, Paul.
Yeah, I always feel that one of the hardest things about communicating and gaining public support for something like that is the complexity behind what you're doing. Like, how do you communicate this complex kind of ecological or conservation requirement? I mean, some of the more controversial ones are things like, predator control, that kind of thing. Like, that's such a tricky area.
There's so much nuance around it. You can't please everyone.
Yeah, it's such a complicated sector, really, in so many ways.
It is.
So going back to comms now, Bev has asked for some kind of summary of what you've said, but in a sort of bite-sized form. So what are the takeaways for science communication with just enough fun facts and ecology without binding it with science? Like, how do you, I guess she's kind of asking, how do you balance fact with fun?
It's really hard. I struggle with it all the time. Again, I do return a lot to that AEIOU acronym, because that has the balance in there in terms of a little bit of enjoyment, a bit of interest, ensure you've given enough information for people to form an opinion. And I think it's very important in science communication not to express an opinion as such, just lay all the information out there and let the reader or the viewer decide. I think there is a lot of value in humour. Beavers, again, lend themselves very well to humour and innuendo. So you can kind of link in a bit of humour and fun to a fact. Again, I think less is more. I think usually in our comms at Beaver Trust, we try and just do one fact and have a really lovely photo to hook people in, because that's all people have time to digest at the moment. But again, it's just trial and error. See what works well. If something got really good engagement, figure out what that was and why. And then if something bombed and you thought it wouldn't, then again, that's probably more valuable to try and unpick why that did badly. But I think collaborating with different organizations, experimenting with different kinds of content, multimedia, podcast, video, live talks like this can be really good for this sort of thing. But again, I think the main thing is just, it sounds like so hypocritical or like ironic, but just don't overthink it. I think just try and keep it simple and experiment with it, if possible.
We we wanted to test some stuff. So that's partly why we're doing these live events. Do many live events before. But something we launched recently was TikTok, and the entire
gosh, have you branched into TikTok?
and it's gone pretty well. I'm not going to tell you how well. You can go and have a look later.
I will have a look at TikTok.
Yeah, do it. And really, the entire decision making around whether we should or shouldn't do TikTok was, why not? Like, let's have a crack.
Exactly. No one's gonna turn around and say, oh my gosh, why have you done that? TikTok is an amazing thing. Beaver Trust should get TikTok, but I'm terrified of it. But
it is kind of frightening. It's a frightening new world. It's
frightening, but a brilliant app to tap into that really hard to reach millennial, Gen Z, whatever they are, audience. I think Gen Z has come before millennials now.
I'm confused.
Makes me feel old. It's confusing, yeah.
But Beaver Talk. I mean, you could just mop up there.
Beaver Talk. I really could. Yeah, we could. I'll try.
Give it a go. Razulus, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, has asked, I remember a documentary that showed muskrats living together with beavers, helping to get food. I wonder if there are any British mammals that would benefit so closely from beavers being reintroduced. Are there any kind of relationships like that?
A good one. So I mentioned about the otters have been known to use ex-beaver lodges. Another one which is really exciting is that beavers with their damming can flood the river plain, I guess, and create wetlands. And the UK has lost over 90% of its wetlands in the last 100 years or so, which is awful. Wetlands are incredible. They're one of our most important habitats. They soak carbon, provide habitat for thousands of species. One of those species are the water vole, and the water vole is one of those mammals, again, which is massively in decline. I think we've lost like 90% of water vole as well. And water voles love a wetland. And so if beavers are creating this wetland and creating these habitats, then the water vole will have, much better quality. It's all about better quality connected habitat. And if the beaver can facilitate that or help be a convener of that habitat, then water voles will, in theory, do much, much better. And that's something that is really exciting for conservation, is having more water voles back.
That's
potentially.
Cool. Yeah, I love that. That's basically, it's kind of what Back from the Brink does in a way, is we
definitely.
Yeah, we think about and find incredibly rare endangered species and then implement conservation measures that benefit those individual species, but the effect is
habitat wide. Well, and you guys do so much for promoting habitat connectivity, which is so important. And having like a flagship species like the beaver or the shrill carnaby, for example, but then really brilliantly explaining how that will just have a domino effect on loads of other species as well across the habitat.
Bev's question from earlier, she's just quickly asked, where was your master's?
AEIOU, University of West of England. Highly recommend.
Do you like it?
Yeah, loved it. Nice. Brilliant.
In case there's anyone thinking about uni in the chat.
Go to AEIOU, it's so good.
Nice. Nick's asked, is there any technology solution that would help with anything you were trying to do?
Good Wi-Fi, decent phone. I've done the majority of all of my stuff just on my iPhone. It's a second-hand iPhone 10, but was worth it really. A GoPro occasionally, but I think for organizational wide, just having a Wi-Fi, Google Docs, Chrome, Zoom, and then again, part of the collaboration thing is we've collaborated with brilliant photographers who go out and get properly good photos of beavers, so that we don't have to sort of, I can't afford a big camera like that, but if you have a good relationship with people who do that for a living, then you can kind of source it that way. So technology, super basic. It's all about how you use it, as I say.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, phones are just nuts now. You can do basically anything on
they're amazing. Well, and you can even get so I've got a little peg on macro thing that was like $3.99 or something. You peg it on and you've got a macro lens, and then you can see like individual pollen bits, if that's the scientific term.
Pollen bits.
Pollen bits, yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. And then someone suggested lodge cam, set up webcams in lodges. Is that a thing?
Yes, that is a thing. That is a thing that Springwatch did last year. They put like a tube. They stuck a tube down into the lodge at the Cornwall Beaver Project, and got some. And Nina Constable did it as well. She got some absolutely stunning footage of kits, just interacting with each other and being groomed by their mum. And yeah, that's absolutely a thing. We've got camera traps all around the site as well, so that captures some very funny footage of beavers slipping off mud banks and falling into the water. And yeah.
Nice.
Really good.
I love that kind of thing, because that's like entertaining and you're also witnessing behaviour. It's actually kind of useful.
Well, and it's totally natural, and you're not disturbing them, which is the best thing. So
Paul's back with another big question. Does the AEIOU framework work better for some demographics than others? For example, when engaging different stakeholders involved in beaver releases, translocation, general public?
Definitely, really good question. It's actually a really important point that I didn't make, and that's just knowing your audience and being able to try and put yourself in their shoes, whether it is a concerned farmer who's concerned about beavers, or an angler, or just a curious member of the public. You've got to try and think, okay, what is it that they're looking for? If I'm a concerned farmer, am I going to want to be given an innuendo about beavers? Probably not. They don't care. They just want their field to not be flooded anymore. Whereas a curious member of the public who's like, oh, what's all this beaver fuss about? They might want an innuendo, or they might want an interesting podcast to listen to on their drive to Tesco. So it's all about trying to figure out what's going to be most appropriate. And at times, the enjoyment factor is perhaps going to be dampened down. And then if you want an opinion forming outcome, perhaps probably the most, and probably an understanding, then you might dial those up a bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like a kind of
it's flexible. You just kind of tweak it. Yeah, exactly. You just tweak it to who you might how you think the person might want to receive that.
Yeah, cool.
All about balance.
Yeah. Right. Do you have any tips? This is a good one, because I think all conservation organisations probably struggle with this at some point. Do you have any tips for tackling divisive topics on social media, especially when you're in the need for snappy posts, like maybe comebacks or responding to like an issue or something?
That's a really good question. Finding out how to best respond to people is really hard. And I just, from a couple of examples in the past, we've had and our chief executive James is an absolute wizard at responding to difficult things, and his method is always just to pick up the phone and give the person a call if they're willing to speak, because there's nothing more powerful, depending on how sort of fired up the other person might be. So for example, this individual was really concerned about beavers on local fish stocks, and James is an angler himself and also an ecologist, and so it was difficult at first. And we also had a blog that was written by an angler that was very pro beaver, and then we had a lot of anglers coming in response to that, contending it. And as I said before, and as we sort of promoted in Beavers Without Borders in the documentary, there's nothing more powerful than just listening and just letting the person talk, because a lot of these people don't feel listened to, and they feel threatened by, conservation groups, and conservationists on social media can be quite mouthy and can come across as quite aggressive and quite fired up and angry about the climate and stuff. And sometimes these very rural communities who've had a very different way of life away from social media perhaps and things feel threatened by that. And I think it's really important to just talk to them and to hear what they have to say, and then to try and work out a solution. And nearly every single time that that's happened, the person has come around to the idea of, for example, beavers, and it's healed and it's a positive outcome.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice. Listen. Yeah.
I think listen, and don't be tempted to respond on social media. I'd respond privately and open up the offer of a conversation and not get reactive.
Nice. Yeah. Becca has a question now. We've got loads more questions. Hopefully we can be able to get through all of them. What's your best advice for being bolder in communications and convincing others to be bolder with you, especially where others you work with are cautious about being bold, tongue-in-cheek, or react quickly to trends?
Difficult. I've got to give hats off to my communications director, Eva, for allowing us to be a little bit maybe bold, I suppose, in the past. But I think it's a lot about trust, and I think it depends what you're doing and what your goal is. I think it's always good to work backwards. If you work for an organization or if you work for yourself, what is it that you want to get out of whatever you're doing? What's your aim for the event, and what do you hope it will do for you or the organization? And then work backwards and think, okay, how can I best do that? And I think, again, it's about trial and error. If you've got and about confidence. And I think if you've seen that perhaps the technique that you're interested in has worked well for others, then that's obviously good evidence to put it to your boss or to run with it yourself. And so I think it is, conservation is famously sleepy and tired and just an echo chamber and doom and gloom in terms of running with that doom and gloom narrative. But we don't have time to think that way anymore, and we've got to be smarter and more agile and decisive about how we do stuff. And I think it is just facing that fact and showing, demonstrating that it can work, and asking for trust and trusting in yourself, and asking whoever is giving the authority with the social media accounts, for example, to trust that it will be okay. But I think start small and then build up. Depends how bold you want to be.
Yeah, I think that's a really good tip though. Giving people a bit more freedom on the channels that they manage, because social media was invented for the individual, so the individual person communicating on that. So I feel like that's kind of lost a little bit with some organizations or corporate.
Well, and like our generation have grown up with the internet and social media, so arguably we know more about it and what works well and what doesn't than people who have been in conservation for like 40, 50 years. So it's almost as well about having that respect as a generation, in terms of, it's no one's fault. It just so happens that we perhaps might be a bit more in tune with what works well on social media or digital channels than you might. And let me show you, if you allow me to show you, then, it might work out well.
Yeah, nice. Laura's asked, in dealing with people's negative perceptions of beavers, especially those who are landowners, farmers, who might be affected by beavers and not on social media, how would you go about
that? Again, listening. And I think providing information. There's constantly more and more research and peer-reviewed research about beavers. And I think in a very gentle way, you can nudge people towards that. But then a lot of people just don't want to be shown a scientific paper written by so-and-so and so-and-so in Norway. They want to, again, be listened to. So I think it's a mixture of providing the information, taking a step back, and working at it in a very collaborative, sort of collegiate way.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a good one from Alex. How do you handle communicating complicated concepts without feeling like you're patronizing your audience?
Good question. Gosh, that is really hard, because no one wants to be taught how to suck eggs. And I think I guess a lot, when I do it personally, I think a lot of the time I come across as knowledgeable on social media, but in essence, I'm just good at research and I'm good at regurgitating it. But I think if you kind of show that you're learning along with your audience, and that you're fascinated by stuff too, and that you're not just you're not just kind of saying, here's a fact, love it, this is, without any regard to where your audience might be coming from and your audience's experience or expertise. Again, it's about knowing your audience. It depends what you're doing. If you're doing a talk about beavers to the wildlife trusts and it's like an internal thing, they probably know quite a bit about beavers already. So you kind of probably don't need to do the long spiel about it. But I think my way is just showing that you're as equally fascinated and that you're on the learning journey with your audience. It can perhaps be a bit more digestible and less patronizing, but it's really hard. And
yeah,
sometimes
kind of sharing the experience, I guess.
Sharing the experience, just as like a mate, you know, as a friend, and not to, you know, you can have authority and credibility, but not come across as patronizing. It is hard though. You almost need someone else to kind of, if you're worried about it, maybe get a second pair of eyes on whatever you've written or recorded, for example, and just say, you know, honestly, how does this come across? Because it can be hard to judge it yourself.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Get someone to have a look at it for you.
Oh, always, yeah.
Becca's got a real banger here. Social media can be a negative space too. What's your top personal well-being tips when dealing with negativity online?
Really good question. I struggle with it. I personally haven't had any negativity directed towards me, but I've certainly felt, you know, the classic inadequate. You look at people's feeds and you think, oh, they look like they're having such a lovely time and I'm here stuck doing this, or oh, everything's so perfect for them and blah blah blah. Whatever it is, social media can be really nasty in that sense. And if you're not aware of it, it can lead you into a nasty spiral. So I'm trying more and more now to have regular breaks from social media, as in full on log out, don't touch it. Try and do no social media at the weekends. It's sometimes quite difficult. And then say, I used to be much more active on Instagram and I now post maybe 2 or 3 times a week max. Because I think it's having that personal time, and you can end up, if you want to be creative and you want to deliver good quality work, it's always quality, not quantity. And you've got to give your head a rest. Go out for a walk, get some exercise, call a friend. One of my main ways to relax is to watch silly telly and comedy and things like that. So I think stepping away from it, especially if you can feel yourself going into a bit of a negative headspace on Twitter, especially, can be quite a negative place. Just get away from it, phone down, outside, do some exercise, get some endorphins, and revisit it when you feel resilient towards it.
Yeah. Big part of my job is social media now, and I have to admit, my personal social media just doesn't exist now because I just cannot do that much.
It's so hard. It takes so much energy, doesn't it? And I think if you want to come across as an energetic voice online, you've got to make sure that you are well in yourself to deliver that, and that you don't just crash after you do a post, or you don't feel rubbish after, you know, so many times I've done a post, I'm just like, oh, I just feel rubbish, because you're kind of trained to be like, oh, how many likes have I got in half an hour? Oh, I don't have as many as I did the other day. It's just like, what life is this? Come on. Yeah. It's just sad. So it's all about balance. And I think the main thing is recognizing that it can be a difficult space. That's the hardest thing. And once you've recognized that, you can sort of start to feel, okay, I can actually exert a bit more control on my hours on it.
Yeah. So I made a bit of an error with Nick's question earlier. He was asking about technology, and what he was actually referring to was IoT type devices to monitor the environment, water level sensors, vibration sensors, tracking kind of technology. Do you use that with the beavers, and do you use that in your communications as well, or?
We don't use that for our comms as such. Some of the data that's been gathered about beavers have obviously been gathered from tracking devices. The beavers on the River Otter, for example, are tagged, so we know where so Devon Wildlife Trust knows where they go and how far they go and how far the kits can disperse and things like that. So that's really valuable data. On Woodland Valley Farm at the Cornwall Beaver Project, we've got a number of maybe 1 or 2 flow devices, and so that's shown how the beavers have slowed the peak flow rate of water and just increase the amount of time it takes for the river to get from A to B, so that in periods of high rainfall, instead of the river just going flooding and everything, it allows the land to absorb it a little bit more slowly, and can essentially help prevent flooding. So they're very, very useful. And I'm sure if you wanted to learn more about it, I could refer you to our restoration team, who are the real field experts in all of this.
Yeah, get in touch with Beaver Trust, Nick. I'm sure they'd be happy to explain.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Couple more questions. So Natalie's asked, I am thinking of doing a master's in ecology. My background is in biochemistry. And this is all in Germany, and also learning the language. How does science comms lend itself
internationally? Gosh, well, I'm not too sure, to be honest. I think maybe just take comfort from the fact that the world is globalized now, and that, you know, you can have people engaging with your content wherever you are from all over the world. I think it works well if you're, so for example, again, knowing your audience. So my audience, this is predominantly British. So if I do British wildlife stuff, that gets good engagement. If I suddenly started doing Malaysian wildlife, I would get really poor engagement because it would be off topic and not really relatable to the audience. So if you're in Germany and you want to do science communication there, get to know your local area, do German stuff, you know, that'll be super interesting. Engage with the local organizations who are doing stuff and see what you can do to maybe collaborate on messaging and things like that. So I think it works brilliantly on a local scale, but then it's good to be aware of the fact that you never know who's going to be watching. And it's all about making it relevant to anyone.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because the UK is interesting because it is so nature depleted. So the amount of communications and organisations working in the UK is often many more than in any other part of the world. So you see more of the communications.
Yeah, it's super unique in that sense.
Yeah. I've done a little bit of international work, which I absolutely loved. And what I would say was any experience you can get and bring to organizations internationally, mostly out of Europe, I would say, is so highly prized and valued by them.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
They're quite, and I don't mean this in any kind of disrespectful way, but they're kind of a little bit behind where we are, or America are, or Europe are, with that kind of targeted, like refined communication about the environment. So I think it's really great that you're studying abroad and doing that, because I think that's
definitely, it's a massive asset. It's a real asset. Yeah, make the most of it.
Definitely. Okay, last question. I think you covered this a bit, but here it is anyway. What's the relation between otters and beavers?
It's not really that exciting, to be honest. I think they tolerate each other. I don't think there's massive amounts of research. I think they sort of respect each other's space on the river. And there's a wonderful piece of footage from Devon Wildlife Trust of a webcam that was, of a trail cam that was on a beaver dam, and an otter rushed over it, which was really cool. So, I mean, we mustn't forget that these animals in a riparian river habitat have coexisted for thousands of years. And so, you know, they're nothing new. It's not, you know, a new partnership or anything like that. So they're just fellow mammals in a riparian habitat. Obviously, they don't compete for prey because otters eat fish and beavers don't. So, yeah, nothing too exciting, but I think probably something that will start being researched as more and more beavers come into our rivers, for sure. Because otters are doing well now, of course. So
yeah, really interesting. Yeah, cool. That's all the questions. So
thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah.
And best of luck with everything from Back from the Brink. It's just, I love following everything that you're doing, and it's just such good work.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. Yeah, so thanks to everyone who's watched the live stream. Thanks for all the brilliant questions. Sophie was brilliant, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to put a link to her channels in the chat. And we've also got another series of events coming up. There's loads of brilliant live talks on their way about art and nature and climate change and all kinds of great things. So check those out. I'm going to put the link in the chat. Other than that, thanks very much, and hopefully see you soon at another event.
Thanks, everyone.